The October wind cut through my coat as I stood before my mother's grave, the gray Chicago sky pressing down like a weight I had carried for 8 months now. The headstone was simple, just as she would have wanted. Gloria Jean Carter, beloved mother, cherished friend, a woman of grace. The dates beneath her name marked 71 years of a life well lived, a life that had shaped everything I had become. I touched my right hand instinctively, reaching for the ring that should have been there. The ring my father had given my mother on the day I was born, a modest diamond in a simple gold setting that she had worn every single day for 40 years. The ring she had pressed into my palm 3 days before she died, her fingers trembling but her eyes fierce with purpose. "This is yours now, baby girl," she had whispered, her voice weakened by the cancer that was stealing her from me. "Your daddy gave me this ring the day you came into the world. He said you were our diamond, and this stone would remind me of that every day until I could give it to you myself. Wear it and remember that you are loved. You have always been loved." I had worn that ring every day since her funeral. Every morning when I woke, every night when I went to sleep, every moment in between. It was my connection to her, my tangible reminder that she was still with me even though her physical presence had left this earth. The diamond was small by conventional standards, barely a 1/4 carat, with a tiny inclusion near the center that looked, if you examined it closely, almost like a heart. My mother had called it her love mark, proof that the stone was unique, one of a kind, just like her marriage, just like her daughter, and now the ring was gone. I had discovered its absence 3 days ago, when I went to my jewelry box to retrieve it before visiting her grave. The memorial mass for the 1-year anniversary of her death was scheduled for tomorrow, and I had planned to wear the ring to the service, to feel her presence with me as I grieved and celebrated and remembered. But when I opened the velvet compartment where I always kept it, I found only empty space. I had torn my house apart searching. Every drawer, every pocket, every possible place where the ring might have fallen or been accidentally placed. I crawled on my hands and knees across the bathroom floor, checked the drain pipes, searched behind furniture and under cushions. Nothing. The ring had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. My husband Marcus had watched my frantic search with a detachment that I found strange, but attributed to his general emotional distance in recent months. He suggested that I must have misplaced it, that perhaps I had taken it off somewhere and forgotten. When I insisted that I never removed the ring except to shower and always placed it in the same spot, he shrugged and told me that stress could affect memory, that maybe the grief was making me forgetful. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that there was an innocent explanation, that the ring would turn up in some obvious place and I would laugh at my own panic. But something in my gut told me that this was not a case of misplacement. Something was deeply wrong, and my husband's lack of concern only amplified my unease. Marcus and I had been married for 8 years, together for 10 before that. We had met at a culinary conference where I was presenting my vision for modern soul food, and he was working as a marketing consultant for a restaurant group. He had been charming, attentive, full of ideas and ambition. He had supported my dream of opening my own restaurant, had helped me with the business plan and the marketing strategy, had stood beside me when I cut the ribbon on Gloria's table 5 years ago. The restaurant was named for my mother, of course. She had taught me to cook, standing beside me in her small kitchen on the south side, showing me how to season greens and fry chicken and bake cornbread that would make grown men weep with joy. She had never lived to see the restaurant open, had died 6 months before I signed the lease on the Bronzeville location that had become my temple of food and family. But I felt her presence there every day, in every dish I prepared, in every customer I fed, in every moment of connection that happened within those walls. Marcus had been a good husband in the early years, supportive, encouraging, proud of my success. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. He became more focused on his own career, his own networking, his own social climbing. He traveled frequently for work, attended conferences and events that kept him away from home for days at a time. When he was home, he was often distracted, checking his phone constantly, stepping away to take calls in private. I had attributed his distance to the demands of his career. He had risen to a senior position at a prestigious marketing firm, handling accounts for major corporations and hobnobbing with executives and influencers. I told myself that his distraction was professional, that his emotional absence was temporary, that once things settled down at work, he would return to being the husband I had married. But standing at my mother's grave with an empty finger and an empty heart, I could no longer ignore the whisper of doubt that had been growing louder for months. Something was wrong in my marriage, something beyond work stress and busy schedules. My mother's ring was gone, and my husband did not seem to care. I drove home through the familiar streets of Chicago, past the brownstones and storefronts of neighborhoods I had known my entire life. The city was preparing for winter, trees shedding their leaves, people moving faster against the cold. I felt disconnected from all of it, floating in a bubble of grief and confusion that separated me from the world I had always known. When I arrived home, Marcus was in his office on a call. I could hear his voice through the closed door, low and animated, laughing at something the person on the other end had said. He sounded happier than he had sounded with me in months. I stood outside the door for a moment, listening, trying to catch words that might explain his mood, but he was speaking too quietly for me to hear clearly. I went to the kitchen and began preparing dinner, moving through the motions automatically while my mind churned with questions. Where was my mother's ring? Why didn't Marcus care that it was missing? What was happening in my marriage that I had been too busy or too trusting to see? My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Denise. "Call me when you can. Need to show you something." I wiped my hands and dialed her number, grateful for the distraction. "Simone, honey, how are you holding up?" Denise's voice was warm with concern. She had been my rock through my mother's illness and death, had sat with me through long nights of grief, had helped me keep the restaurant running when I could barely function. "I'm managing," I said, which was not quite a lie, but not quite the truth either. "What did you need to show me?" There was a pause on the line, a hesitation that made my stomach tighten. "I don't know if I should be showing you this, but I think you need to see it. Can you come by the salon tomorrow after the memorial mass? We need to talk in person." "Denise, you're scaring me. What is it?" "It's probably nothing. I'm probably overreacting. But there were some photos posted from that charity gala last week, the one Marcus went to for work, and I think you should see them. That's all." I agreed to meet her the following afternoon, and we hung up. But her words lingered in my mind, adding another layer of unease to the anxiety already churning in my chest. Photos from the charity gala. Marcus had attended that event alone, claiming it was a work obligation and that spouses were not included. He had come home late that night, smelling of expensive cologne and acting strangely cheerful. I finished preparing dinner in silence, my thoughts racing through possibilities I did not want to consider. When Marcus finally emerged from his office, he kissed my cheek perfunctorily and sat down at the table without commenting on the food I had made. We ate in near silence, the distance between us feeling wider than ever. That night, I lay awake in bed while Marcus slept soundly beside me. I stared at the ceiling and thought about my mother, about her ring, about the life I had built and the cracks that were beginning to show in its foundation. I thought about the way Marcus had changed, the way our marriage had changed, the way I had ignored warning signs because I was too busy grieving and working and surviving to pay attention. Tomorrow I would attend the memorial mass for my mother. Tomorrow I would meet with Denise and see whatever photos she thought I needed to see. Tomorrow I might finally have to confront the truth that I had been avoiding for months. I closed my eyes and prayed for strength, for wisdom, for the courage to face whatever was coming. My mother had always told me that I was stronger than I knew, that I had inherited her resilience and her fire. I would need every ounce of that strength in the days ahead. Because deep in my heart, beneath the grief and the confusion and the desperate hope that I was wrong, I already knew that my world was about to shatter. The memorial mass the next morning was beautiful and devastating in equal measure. The church where my mother had worshipped for 50 years was filled with people who had loved her, friends and neighbors, and former co-workers who still remembered her kindness and her laughter. I sat in the front pew with Marcus beside me, accepting condolences and embracing mourners while my mind remained fixed on the empty space on my finger. My cousin Tanya had flown in from Atlanta for the service. She sat on my other side, holding my hand. her presence a comfort that Marcus's could not provide. She had noticed the missing ring immediately, her eyes going to my bare finger with a question she was too tactful to ask in public. I had whispered that I would explain later, and she had nodded, her expression troubled. The priest spoke beautifully about my mother's life, her faith, her devotion to family and community. He told stories I had heard 100 times but never tired of hearing, about her volunteer work at the homeless shelter, her famous sweet potato pie that she brought to every church function, her way of making everyone she met feel seen and valued. I wept quietly, missing her with an intensity that 8 months had done nothing to diminish. Marcus sat stiffly beside me, checking his phone twice during the service when he thought no one was looking. His lack of reverence for the occasion, his obvious impatience to be elsewhere, confirmed what I had been reluctant to admit. My husband had checked out of our marriage long ago. He was present in body, but absent in every way that mattered. After the service, there was a reception in the church hall where people shared memories and ate the food that church members had prepared. I moved through the crowd in a daze, accepting hugs and handshakes, thanking people for coming, playing the role of grieving daughter while inside I felt numb. Marcus had disappeared somewhere, probably outside taking a call, leaving me to manage the social obligations alone. Denise appeared at my side, her hand on my elbow, steering me toward a quiet corner. "You okay, honey?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak without crying. "Come to the salon this afternoon. We'll talk." She hugged me tightly and then disappeared back into the crowd, leaving me to wonder what she had to show me that required such privacy. The drive to her salon after the reception was short but felt endless. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, and I had to force myself to breathe slowly and steadily. Whatever Denise had to show me, I needed to see it. I needed to understand what was happening in my life, even if the truth was something I did not want to face. Denise was waiting for me in her office, the door closed against the busy Saturday afternoon salon floor. She gestured for me to sit, and then she placed her phone in my hands, already opened to a series of photographs. These were posted by someone who was at the charity gala last week. I follow her because she's a client, and I saw them this morning. I almost didn't show you because I thought maybe I was seeing things that weren't there, but then I looked closer, and I'm sorry, Simone, I'm so sorry. I looked down at the screen and felt the world stop spinning. The first photo showed Marcus at the gala, looking handsome in his tuxedo, a champagne glass in his hand. That alone meant nothing. But standing beside him, her arm linked through his, her body pressed close in a way that no colleague would stand, was a young woman I had never seen before. She was beautiful, with flawless skin and designer clothes, and a smile that radiated possession. She was looking at my husband the way I used to look at him, with adoration and desire and the certainty of ownership. I swiped to the next photo. Marcus and the woman dancing, his hands on her waist, her arms around his neck. Another swipe. The two of them laughing together at a table, their heads bent close. Another swipe. A group photo where she stood in front of him and he had his arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. And then I saw it. In the last photo, the woman was raising her glass in a toast, and on her right hand, glinting in the light of the gala chandeliers, was my mother's ring. I recognized it instantly. The simple gold band, the modest diamond, and if I zoomed in, if I looked closely enough, I knew I would see the tiny heart-shaped inclusion that made that stone unique in all the world. My mother's ring, on the finger of my husband's mistress. I looked up at Denise, unable to speak, unable to process what I was seeing. She was crying, tears streaming down her face, her hand reaching for mine. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I looked back at the phone, at the image of my mother's ring on a stranger's hand, and I felt something inside me shift. The grief and confusion crystallized into something harder, something colder. The numbness gave way to a clarity that was almost frightening in its intensity. My husband had not just betrayed me with another woman. He had taken the most precious thing I owned, the only physical connection I had to my dead mother, and he had given it to his mistress. This was not just infidelity. This was desecration, and I was going to make him pay. I sat in Denise's office for a long time after she showed me those photographs, staring at the image of my mother's ring on another woman's finger until the screen went dark. My friend sat beside me in silence, her presence a comfort even though there was nothing she could say to make this better. There were no words for what I was feeling, no comfort adequate for the magnitude of this betrayal. The woman in the photos was young, perhaps late 20s, with the kind of polished beauty that came from expensive products and professional attention. Her hair was flawlessly styled, her makeup impeccable, her clothes clearly designer. She looked like the kind of woman who had never worked a double shift in a kitchen, who had never worried about making payroll, who had never sacrificed and struggled to build something from nothing. And she was wearing my dead mother's ring. I finally handed the phone back to Denise and stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. I need to find out who she is. Denise was already typing on her computer. The woman who posted the photos tagged everyone in them. Give me a minute. While she searched, I paced the small office, my mind racing through the implications of what I had discovered. Marcus had been having an affair. That alone would have been devastating, a betrayal of 8 years of marriage and a decade of partnership. But he had also stolen my mother's ring, the most sacred object I possessed, and given it to this woman. He had taken my grief and my heritage and my connection to the woman who had given me life, and he had used it to adorn his mistress. I thought about all the times in recent months when Marcus had been distant, distracted, unavailable. The late nights at the office, the weekend conferences, the business trips that seemed to multiply exponentially. I had trusted him. I had believed his explanations without question because he was my husband, and I loved him, and it never occurred to me that he could be capable of such complete betrayal. Found her. Denise's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. Her name is Keisha Palmer. She's an influencer, lifestyle and fashion mostly. Has about 50,000 followers on Instagram. I moved to stand behind Denise, looking over her shoulder at the screen. Keisha Palmer's Instagram profile was a curated display of luxury and aspiration. Photos of designer handbags and expensive restaurants and exotic vacation destinations. Selfies in beautiful outfits with carefully crafted captions about self-love and manifestation and living your best life. She presented herself as a young entrepreneur and content creator, though there was no indication of what actual business she ran or what content she created beyond photos of herself looking glamorous. I scrolled through her feed, noting the designer items that appeared repeatedly. A Chanel bag, Louboutin heels. A diamond tennis bracelet that looked suspiciously similar to one that had gone missing from my own jewelry box months ago, a piece I had assumed I had lost. The more I looked, the more I recognized gifts I had thought Marcus bought for himself, items I had vaguely registered and then forgotten about because I was too focused on the restaurant and my grief to pay attention. She's been posting this stuff for almost 2 years, Denise observed, scrolling through the timeline. And look at this. She pointed to a pattern I had not noticed at first. Every few weeks, Keisha posted a photo with a caption thanking her secret admirer or her generous benefactor for spoiling her. The posts were coy and suggestive, designed to create intrigue and jealousy among her followers without revealing too much. But now that I knew what I was looking for, the timeline was clear. The luxury items appeared shortly after Marcus's business trips. The grateful posts coincided with dates I could now identify as their apparent rendezvous. My husband had been systematically looting our life to fund this woman's lifestyle. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A post from 3 weeks ago, a close-up of Keisha's hand against a backdrop of autumn leaves. On her finger was my mother's ring, and the caption read, "When he gives you his grandmother's ring because you're the one who really matters to him. Some women are just meant to be wives. Others are meant to be afterthoughts. Know your worth, queens." His grandmother's ring. Marcus had told this woman that my mother's ring, the ring that had belonged to my mother and was passed to me on her deathbed, was his grandmother's ring. He had not just stolen from me. He had erased my mother from the story entirely, rewritten history to make himself the heir to a legacy that was never his. I felt sick, physically, violently sick. I excused myself to Denise's bathroom and stood over the sink, splashing cold water on my face, and trying to breathe through the waves of nausea and rage that threatened to overwhelm me. When I finally looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My eyes were red and swollen, my face drawn with grief and shock, but beneath all of that was something else. Something hard and determined and absolutely unwilling to let this stand. I returned to Denise's office and sat down with the calm focus of someone who had moved past emotion into action. I need to see everything. Every post, every tagged photo, every comment Marcus has ever made on her account. We spent the next 2 hours compiling evidence. Marcus's Instagram account, which I had never paid much attention to, was a treasure trove of incriminating interaction. He had liked nearly every photo Keisha posted. He had left comments that ranged from flattering to explicitly romantic, calling her beautiful, amazing, the best thing in his life. On a photo of her in a bikini from what appeared to be their vacation together, he had commented, "All mine," with a heart emoji. The vacation photos were from a resort in Miami, a trip that Marcus had told me was a corporate retreat for his firm. The dates matched perfectly. While I had been at home running my restaurant and grieving my mother, my husband had been on a beach with his mistress, buying her designer swimwear and posting couple photos for anyone who cared to look. I had never looked. I had trusted him completely and never thought to verify anything he told me. My faith in my marriage had been so absolute that the idea of checking his social media, of questioning his stories, had never even occurred to me. That trust now felt like the most foolish thing I had ever done. When we finally finished our research, I had screenshots of everything, every interaction, every tagged photo, every piece of evidence that my husband had been living a double life for at least 2 years. But I knew this was not enough. I needed to understand the full extent of his betrayal, and that meant looking at something I had been avoiding: the finances. I called my accountant from Denise's office and asked her to run a complete audit of Gloria's table, going back 3 years. Marcus had insisted on helping with the restaurant's bookkeeping, claiming it was his way of supporting my dream while I focused on the creative side. I had been grateful for his assistance, relieved to have one less thing to worry about during the chaos of opening and running a business. Now I wondered what that help had actually entailed. I also called my cousin Tanya, who was still in town after the memorial mass, and asked her to come to Denise's salon. When she arrived, I showed her everything: the photos, the social media posts, the evidence of my husband's affair. She held me while I cried, and then she pulled back and looked me in the eye with the fierce determination that ran in our family's blood. "What do you want to do?" I wiped my face and took a deep breath. "I want to know everything. I want to know how deep this goes. And then I want to take back what's mine." "Then that's what we'll do." Tanya squeezed my hands. "Whatever you need, I'm here. We all are." I left Denise's salon that evening with a folder full of printed screenshots and a heart full of cold fury. Marcus was still at a work event and would not be home until late. I had time to do what I needed to do. I went home and found his iPad on the nightstand, the device he used for casual browsing and rarely bothered to secure. His messages were synced to the device, and he had not thought to log out because he had never imagined I would look. The arrogance of that assumption, the certainty that I would remain oblivious, made my anger burn even hotter. I opened his messages and found months of conversations with Keisha. The intimacy of their exchanges made me physically ill. Pet names and inside jokes and promises that turned my marriage into a lie. He called her his queen, his future, the woman he should have married. He called me his obligation, his mistake, the dead weight he was planning to shed as soon as he could figure out how to profit from the divorce. And there, in a message from 6 weeks ago, was the confirmation I needed. "Don't worry, baby," Marcus had written. "Once I file for divorce, I'm entitled to half of everything she built. The restaurant, the investments, all of it. She won't see it coming until it's too late. And then you and I can start our real life together." He was planning to steal from me, not just the jewelry, not just the money he had already taken, but half of the restaurant I had built with my own hands, named for my own mother, created from my own talent and sacrifice. He thought he could betray me, rob me, and then claim half of my life's work as his reward. He was wrong. I took screenshots of every message and emailed them to myself and to Tanya and to Denise. Then I put the iPad back exactly where I had found it and went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of wine. I sat at the counter in my beautiful home, surrounded by the life I had built, and I began to plan. Marcus thought he was the smart one. He thought he was running a con on a foolish woman too busy with work and grief to notice what was happening. He thought he had already won. But he had underestimated me. They all had. And by the time I was finished, they would understand exactly who they were dealing with. The audit results arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to my office at the restaurant by my accountant Veronica, a woman whose meticulous nature I had always appreciated, but never more than in this moment. She sat across from me at my desk, her expression grave, a thick folder of documents spread between us. "I found significant irregularities," she began, her voice careful and professional. "Over the past 26 months, approximately $87,000 has been diverted from the restaurant's operating accounts into a series of personal transactions that were disguised as business expenses. $87,000. The number hung in the air between us, obscene in its magnitude. That money had come from Gloria's table, from the business I had built in my mother's name, from the sweat and sacrifice of years of work. Marcus had been siphoning it away, dollar by dollar, to fund his affair and impress his mistress. Veronica walked me through the details. Fake vendor payments that went to accounts Marcus controlled. Inflated expense reports for business trips that were actually romantic getaways. Credit card charges for jewelry and designer goods that had been buried in the restaurant's general expenses. He had been careful, spreading the theft across multiple categories and time periods to avoid detection. But he had not been careful enough, and now I had documentation of every dollar he had stolen. I thought about Keisha's Instagram feed, the designer bags and the luxury vacations, and the jewelry that sparkled on her fingers. I thought about my mother's ring, the modest diamond that she had worn with more pride than any wealthy woman wore her carats. Marcus had funded Keisha's lifestyle with money stolen from the restaurant named for my mother. The layers of desecration were almost too much to comprehend. That afternoon, I met with Patrice Morgan, a divorce attorney whose reputation for ruthless effectiveness preceded her. Her office was on the 47th floor of a downtown high-rise, with views of Lake Michigan that spoke to her success. She was a striking woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked locks and an air of absolute competence that immediately put me at ease. I told her everything. The affair, the stolen jewelry, the embezzlement, the messages revealing Marcus's plan to claim half of my restaurant in a divorce. Patrice listened without interruption, her face betraying nothing, her pen moving steadily across her legal pad. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, reviewing her notes. Then she looked up at me with a smile that was almost predatory. "Mrs. Carter, your husband has made some very serious mistakes. Let me explain your position." The restaurant, she confirmed, was my separate property. I had started the business before my marriage with my own savings and a loan from my mother. Marcus had contributed nothing financially, and his involvement in the bookkeeping did not constitute ownership. His claim to half the business would fail spectacularly in court, especially with evidence of his embezzlement. The embezzlement itself was a crime. Patrice could refer the case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution if I chose that route. Marcus could face felony charges, potential prison time, and a permanent criminal record. But she also offered an alternative. Use the threat of criminal prosecution as leverage for a civil settlement that would require Marcus to repay every dollar he had stolen plus damages. The jewelry was simpler. Everything Marcus had taken was my separate property, inherited or purchased before marriage. I had documentation, appraisals, insurance records. Keisha Palmer had no legal claim to any of it, regardless of how the items had come into her possession. A demand letter from Patrice's firm would likely be enough to recover the pieces, with the implied threat of criminal charges for receiving stolen property if Keisha refused. "But there's something else you need to consider," Patrice said, leaning forward. "Your husband is planning to file for divorce and claim half your assets. If he files first, he gets to set the narrative. He'll claim the restaurant is marital property, that you were an absentee wife, that he contributed equally to building your success. It will be lies, and we can defeat it, but it will be expensive and time-consuming. So I should file first. Ideally, yes, but there's an even better option. Patrice's smile sharpened. You file first, with all the evidence of his infidelity, his embezzlement, and his theft. You make it impossible for him to claim anything because the court will see exactly who he is and what he's done. And you do it publicly, in a way that destroys his reputation so completely that no one in this city will ever trust him again. I thought about Marcus's career, his carefully cultivated image as a successful marketing executive, his network of professional contacts and social connections. I thought about how much his reputation meant to him, how much effort he put into maintaining the appearance of success and sophistication. And I thought about my mother, who had valued honesty and integrity above all else, who had taught me that character was measured not by what you showed the world, but by what you did when no one was watching. I want to do this right, I said slowly. I want to protect myself and recover what's mine. But I don't want to become someone my mother wouldn't recognize. I don't want revenge. I want justice. Patrice nodded, her expression softening slightly. Justice is what we'll get. The consequences Marcus faces will be the natural result of his own actions. You're not destroying him. He destroyed himself. You're just making sure the truth comes to light. We spent the next hour developing a strategy. Patrice would prepare the divorce filing with full documentation of Marcus's misconduct. She would also prepare a civil complaint for the embezzled funds and a demand for return of the stolen jewelry. We would time the filing to coincide with an event where Marcus would be publicly exposed, maximizing the impact and minimizing his ability to control the narrative. And then I remembered something. The annual Gloria's Table Charity Gala was scheduled for 3 weeks from now. It was the biggest event of my restaurant's year, a celebration that brought together Chicago's Black community leaders, business owners, and philanthropists to raise money for Southside youth programs. Marcus always attended as my husband, playing the role of supportive spouse while networking for his own benefit. He'll be at the gala, I said. And if I know Marcus, he'll try to bring her. Patrice's eyebrows rose. The mistress? To your own event? He's been getting bolder. He thinks I'm oblivious. He might not bring her as his date, but I wouldn't be surprised if she showed up coincidentally and they spent the evening together while I'm busy hosting. I paused, a plan forming in my mind. What if that's when we do it? What if I use my own event as the stage? We discussed the logistics, the risks, the potential for things to go wrong. But by the end of the meeting, we had a plan. The gala would be Marcus's undoing, and it would happen in front of everyone who mattered to his career and social standing. He wanted to steal my restaurant and give my mother's ring to his mistress. He would leave that event with nothing. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in deception. I played the role of oblivious wife with Oscar-worthy commitment, smiling at Marcus over dinner, making small talk about our days, even initiating intimacy that made my skin crawl, but maintained the illusion of normalcy. I could not let him suspect that I knew anything, could not give him any reason to accelerate his plans or take preemptive action. Meanwhile, I was building my case piece by piece. Veronica continued to document the financial irregularities, creating a clear paper trail that would be irrefutable in court. Patrice prepared the legal filings, each document a weapon in the arsenal I was assembling. Denise and Tanya helped me monitor Keisha's social media, tracking new posts and looking for any indication that she was aware of what was coming. And I planned the gala with more attention to detail than any event I had ever hosted. I personally curated the guest list, ensuring that key members of the media, the business community, and Marcus's professional network would be in attendance. I arranged for a presentation segment where I would speak about the restaurant's charitable work, a segment that would give me a platform and an audience. I prepared remarks that were inspirational on the surface, but would transition seamlessly into revelation. 3 days before the event, I received confirmation of what I had suspected. A mutual acquaintance mentioned casually that she had seen Keisha purchasing a gown at a boutique downtown, something glamorous for a big event this weekend. Marcus had not mentioned inviting anyone to the gala, had not said anything about Keisha's attendance. But I knew she would be there, drawn by the opportunity to parade her stolen jewelry and her stolen man in front of Chicago's elite. She had no idea that she was walking into a trap. The night before the gala, I took a long bath and thought about my mother. I thought about her strength, her grace, her unwavering commitment to doing what was right even when it was difficult. I thought about the ring she had given me, the ring that was still on Keisha Palmer's finger, and I promised her silently that I would get it back. Tomorrow, Marcus would learn that there was a price for betrayal. Tomorrow, Keisha would learn that stolen goods never truly belong to the thief. And tomorrow, I would reclaim my legacy and begin building a life without the man who had tried to destroy me. My mother had raised me to be strong. Tomorrow, I would make her proud. The morning of the gala dawned gray and cold, a typical November day in Chicago that matched the steel in my heart. I woke early and went through my preparations with methodical calm, each action bringing me closer to the moment I had been building toward for weeks. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a stunning emerald green gown that my mother had helped me select for a previous gala, back when she was still healthy enough to shop with me. She had loved this dress, had said the color brought out the warmth in my skin and the fire in my eyes. I wanted her with me tonight in every way possible, and wearing her favorite dress was one small way to feel her presence. My hair and makeup were done by Denise herself, who came to my house early that morning to help me prepare. She worked in silence, understanding that I needed to focus, that I was gathering my strength for what was to come. When she finished, she turned me toward the mirror and stood behind me, her hands on my shoulders. "You look like a queen," she said softly. "Your mama would be so proud." I looked at my reflection and saw someone I almost did not recognize. A woman who had been through fire and emerged harder, sharper, more certain of her own worth. The grief was still there, and the anger, and the hurt. But overlaying all of it was determination. Tonight, I would take back what was mine. Marcus left for the venue early, claiming he needed to help with setup, though I knew he was probably coordinating with Keisha about her arrival. I did not challenge his excuse, did not give any indication that I suspected anything. I simply kissed him goodbye and told him I would see him there, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Tanya arrived to drive me to the event, and we sat in the car for a few minutes before leaving, going over the plan one final time. Patrice would be at the gala with the legal documents, ready to serve Marcus the moment I gave the signal. A journalist friend of mine would be present, someone I trusted to report the story accurately and fairly. Security had been briefed to prevent Marcus or Keisha from leaving until the situation was resolved. Everything was in place. There was nothing left to do but walk into that ballroom and change my life forever. As we pulled away from the curb, I touched the empty space on my finger where my mother's ring should have been. Tonight, I told myself, tonight, it comes home. The ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton was transformed into a vision of elegance and warmth, every detail reflecting the spirit of Gloria's table and the community it served. Gold and cream linens draped the tables, candlelight flickered in crystal holders, and photographs of the restaurant's charitable work lined the walls. Nearly 300 guests filled the space, a sea of beautiful black faces representing the best of Chicago's business community, art scene, and philanthropic organizations. I moved through the crowd with practiced grace, greeting guests and accepting compliments on the event, while my eyes constantly scanned for two faces. Marcus was already there, working the room with the charm that had once captivated me, shaking hands and making connections that he hoped would serve his career. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, confident in a way that made me want to scream. He had no idea what was coming, and then I saw her. Keisha Palmer entered the ballroom like she owned it, wearing a red gown that clung to her figure and demanded attention. She was on the arm of a man I did not recognize, some +1 who provided cover for her presence, but her eyes immediately sought out Marcus across the room. I watched them exchange a look that lasted only a second, but communicated everything. They were together tonight, even if they pretended otherwise. And on her finger, catching the light with every gesture, was my mother's ring. I felt Tanya's hand on my elbow, steadying me. "Easy," she murmured. "We stick to the plan." I nodded, forcing myself to breathe. The plan. We had discussed every contingency, prepared for every scenario. I could not let emotion derail what needed to happen. The first hour of the event proceeded normally. Cocktails and mingling, silent auction bidding, the social choreography of charity galas. I played my role as host, thanking sponsors and introducing guests while keeping track of Marcus and Keisha's movements. They were careful not to appear together, but I caught them speaking in corners, touching briefly when they thought no one was looking. The presentation segment was scheduled for 9 o'clock. I excused myself to prepare, retreating to a small anteroom where Patrice was waiting with a folder of documents and a reassuring smile. "Everything is ready," she said. "The moment you give the word, Marcus will be served with the divorce papers and the civil complaint. The evidence package will be distributed to the media contacts you identified. And security knows to detain both Marcus and Ms. Palmer until we've recovered the jewelry." I reviewed my remarks one final time, the words I had crafted so carefully over the past weeks. They began as a celebration of the restaurant's charitable impact, transitioned into a reflection on my mother's legacy, and culminated in a revelation that would change everything. "It's time," I said. I walked to the stage and stepped up to the microphone, the spotlight warm on my face. The room quieted as guests turned their attention to the front, drinks in hand, smiles expectant. Marcus stood near the back, Keisha not far from him, both looking relaxed and unsuspecting. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady and clear. "Thank you for joining us for the 5th annual Gloria's Table Charity Gala. Every year, this event reminds me of why I do what I do, and more importantly, of the woman who taught me that food is love made visible." I spoke about my mother, about her kitchen, about the lessons she had imparted through every meal she prepared. I spoke about the restaurant and its mission to feed not just bodies but souls, to create spaces of welcome and belonging in a world that often denied those things to people who looked like us. The audience was rapt, nodding along, some wiping tears at my words about Gloria, and then I shifted. But tonight I need to share something difficult, something that speaks to another of my mother's lessons, one that I had to learn the hard way. She used to say that the truth will set you free, but first it might break your heart. I paused, letting the words settle. My heart has been broken recently, and I think you all deserve to know why. I saw Marcus stiffen, his smile freezing on his face. Keisha looked confused, her champagne glass pausing halfway to her lips. 8 months ago, I lost my mother to cancer. Those of you who knew her know that she was the heart of everything I've built. She left me many things, but the most precious was a ring. A simple diamond ring that my father gave her on the day I was born. She wore it for 40 years, and on her deathbed, she placed it in my hand and asked me to wear it always. My voice cracked slightly, genuine emotion bleeding through. That ring disappeared from my home several weeks ago. I was devastated. I thought I had lost the last physical connection to my mother. I looked directly at Marcus now, watched the color drain from his face. But I didn't lose it. It was stolen by my own husband and given to his mistress. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, looking for Marcus, who stood frozen in place. For 2 years, while I grieved my mother and poured myself into this restaurant, my husband, Marcus Carter, has been having an affair with a woman named Keisha Palmer. I gestured toward Keisha, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. That woman is wearing my mother's ring right now. She's also wearing jewelry and designer items purchased with $87,000 that Marcus embezzled from Gloria's Table, from the charitable organization that feeds hungry children in this community. The room erupted. People turned to stare at Marcus and Keisha, voices rising in shock and outrage. Marcus tried to move toward the exit, but security staff materialized to block his path. Keisha was similarly contained, her face a mask of panic. I raised my hand for quiet, and remarkably, the room settled. I'm not telling you this for revenge. I'm telling you this because my mother believed in truth, and because the people in this room deserve to know who they're dealing with. Marcus Carter is not the man he pretends to be. He is a thief, a liar, and someone who thought nothing of desecrating a dead woman's memory to please his mistress. Patrice appeared at Marcus's side, pressing documents into his hands. "Marcus Carter, you are being served with divorce papers and a civil complaint for fraud, embezzlement, and theft. You will also be hearing from the district attorney's office regarding potential criminal charges." Marcus's face contorted with rage. "Simone, you can't do this. You're making a mistake. I can explain everything." "There's nothing to explain." My voice was ice. I have the bank records, the emails, the photographs. I have every piece of evidence needed to prove what you've done. And I have something else. I turned to Keisha, who was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I have the documentation proving that every item you're wearing tonight was purchased with stolen money, including my mother's ring. I stepped down from the stage and walked toward Keisha, the crowd parting before me. I stopped directly in front of her, looking down at the ring that had meant everything to my mother. You can return it willingly, or security can hold you until the police arrive to take you into custody for receiving stolen property. Your choice. Keisha's hands trembled as she pulled the ring from her finger. She held it out to me, unable to meet my eyes, and I took it with a satisfaction so deep it felt like finally being able to breathe after months underwater. I slipped the ring onto my finger, feeling the familiar weight of the gold band, the modest diamond that contained my mother's love. It was home. I turned to face Marcus one final time. He looked small now, diminished, all his charm stripped away to reveal the hollow man beneath. You thought you could steal from me, betray me, and walk away with half of everything I built. But you forgot something important. I am Gloria Carter's daughter, and we don't break. We rise. I walked away from him, walked through the crowd of supporters who reached out to touch my arm and murmur encouragement, walked out of the ballroom with my head high and my mother's ring on my finger. Behind me, I could hear Marcus shouting, Keisha sobbing, the chaos of a carefully constructed facade crumbling to dust. But I did not look back. That chapter of my life was over, and I had already begun writing the next one. The aftermath of the gala was swift and merciless. The story spread through Chicago's social media and gossip networks like wildfire, helped along by the journalist I had strategically invited. By midnight, Marcus Carter's name was synonymous with betrayal and theft in every circle that mattered to his career. By morning, his firm had issued a statement announcing his immediate termination, citing conduct unbecoming of a representative of their organization. I spent that night at Denise's house, surrounded by my closest friends, processing what had happened. The ring was back on my finger where it belonged, and every few minutes I found myself touching it, reassuring myself that it was real, that I had actually recovered this piece of my mother's legacy. Tanya poured champagne, declaring that we were celebrating not just victory, but survival. You did it, Simone. You took back everything he tried to steal from you. Not everything, I said quietly. He stole 8 years of my life, my trust, my belief in my own judgment. I looked at the ring, at the tiny, heart-shaped inclusion that my mother had loved so much. But this I got back. And the rest I'll rebuild. We talked until dawn, crying and laughing and planning a future that no longer included Marcus Carter. Denise offered to host me for as long as I needed, but I knew that eventually I would have to return to the house I had shared with my husband. It was my house, after all. He was the one who would have to leave. The legal proceedings moved quickly after the gala. Marcus initially tried to contest the divorce, claiming that my public accusations had defamed him and that he was entitled to compensation for damages to his reputation. Patrice demolished that argument with the evidence we had compiled, and the judge showed no sympathy for a man who had embezzled from his wife's charity and stolen her dead mother's jewelry. The divorce was finalized within 90 days. Marcus received nothing. Not the house, not a share of the restaurant, not a penny of alimony. The civil judgment for the embezzled funds required him to repay every dollar, plus interest and damages, a debt that would follow him for years. Keisha Palmer fared no better. She was forced to return all items purchased with embezzled money, which constituted nearly everything of value she owned. Her carefully curated image as a successful influencer crumbled when her followers learned the truth about where her luxury lifestyle had come from. Sponsors dropped her, brands distanced themselves, and within weeks her account had lost more than half its followers. But the best part, the part that made me smile every time I thought about it, came about 3 months after the divorce was finalized. I was having dinner with Denise and Tanya at a new restaurant in the West Loop, celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the gala that had changed everything. We were laughing about something, enjoying our wine and each other's company, when our waiter approached to take our order. I looked up and saw Marcus. He was wearing a white shirt and black apron, the uniform of the restaurant's serving staff. His face was thinner than I remembered, his eyes carrying a weariness that had not been there before. He saw me at the same moment I saw him, and for a long, frozen second, neither of us spoke. "Good evening," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Welcome to Marcello's. Can I tell you about our specials?" I stared at him, this man who had once mocked my career in the restaurant industry, who had thought himself above the work of service, who had planned to steal half of Gloria's table and live off my labor for the rest of his life. And now here he was, wearing an apron and reciting specials to the woman he had betrayed. "Hello, Marcus," I said calmly. "I'd love to hear the specials." He stumbled through the descriptions, unable to meet my eyes. Denise and Tanya sat in stunned silence, watching this improbable scene unfold. When he finished, I ordered a steak, medium rare, and a glass of the house Cabernet. "Coming right up," he said, and fled toward the kitchen. After he left, Denise grabbed my arm. "Was that really?" "Yes." I took a sip of water, surprisingly calm. "That was really my ex-husband, now working as a waiter at a mid-range restaurant in Chicago." Tanya shook her head in disbelief. "I guess when you lose your job, your reputation, and every connection you ever had, the options get pretty limited. He always said restaurant work was beneath him." I looked around at the perfectly nice but unremarkable establishment. Turns out it's exactly where he belongs. When Marcus returned with our food, I thanked him politely and waited until he had left before eating. The steak was good, the wine was acceptable, and the company was the best I could ask for. We finished our meal in high spirits, talking about everything except the elephant that had just served us dinner. When the bill came, I left a generous tip. More than generous, actually. Enough that it would help Marcus pay off the debt he owed me just slightly faster. I signed the receipt with a flourish and stood to leave, pausing for just a moment to look at Marcus across the restaurant. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. I smiled at him, a genuine smile without malice or triumph, and walked out into the Chicago night with my friends. My mother had always told me that the best revenge was living well. As I stepped into the cool evening air, her ring warm on my finger, I knew that I was doing exactly that. 1 year after the gala that changed everything, I stood in the kitchen of Gloria's table, watching my team prepare for the dinner rush. The restaurant had never been busier or more successful. The publicity from the scandal had brought curious diners through our doors, but it was the food and the hospitality that kept them coming back. We had expanded our catering operation, hired additional staff, and opened a second location on the north side that was already turning a profit. Success, I had learned, was the sweetest form of vindication. The ring was on my finger where it had been every day since I reclaimed it from Keisha Palmer at the gala. Sometimes I caught myself touching it unconsciously, running my thumb over the simple gold band, feeling the tiny imperfection in the diamond that my mother had called her love mark. It was my talisman, my connection to the woman who had shaped everything I had become. I thought about my mother every day, but the grief had transformed over the past year. The sharp, stabbing pain had softened into something more like melancholy, a bittersweet ache that I had learned to carry without being crushed by it. She was gone, but she was also everywhere. In the recipes I prepared, in the kitchen she had taught me to love, in the ring that reminded me of her strength. The consequences of the gala had rippled outward in ways I had not fully anticipated. Marcus had lost everything that mattered to him, his career, his reputation, his social standing, his access to other people's resources. The civil judgment against him had wiped out whatever savings he had accumulated, and the requirement to repay the $87,000 he had embezzled meant that he would be paying me for years to come. I had seen him twice more since that evening at Marcello's. Once at the courthouse during our final divorce hearing, where he had signed the papers with trembling hands and refused to look at me. And once on the street in Bronzeville, where he had been walking alone, looking thin and tired, wearing clothes that I did not recognize, and that clearly came from somewhere far less expensive than his former wardrobe. He had called me several times in the months after the divorce, leaving voicemails that progressed from angry to pleading to pathetic. He wanted to explain. He wanted another chance. He wanted me to know that he understood now what he had lost, that he was sorry, that he would do anything to make things right. I deleted each message without responding. Some bridges, once burned, should never be rebuilt. Keisha Palmer had fared no better. Her influencer career had collapsed entirely once the truth about her lifestyle became public. Sponsors had dropped her, followers had abandoned her, and the carefully constructed image of effortless luxury had been revealed as a facade built on stolen money and moral bankruptcy. The last I had heard, she had moved back to her hometown in Indiana, where presumably she was learning to live without the designer bags and exotic vacations that Marcus's theft had provided. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall. Perhaps I should have, after everything they had done to me. But watching two people destroy themselves through their own greed and cruelty was not a source of joy. It was simply a confirmation of what my mother had always taught me, that character matters, that choices have consequences, that the truth eventually finds its way to the surface, no matter how deeply you try to bury it. What did bring me joy was the life I had built in the aftermath of my marriage's implosion. I had poured myself into the restaurant with renewed energy and focus, channeling the anger and grief into creativity and connection. I had deepened my relationships with Denise and Tanya and the circle of friends who had supported me through the darkest time. I had started therapy, working with a counselor who helped me understand the patterns that had led me to stay in a marriage that was slowly poisoning me. And 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I had met someone. His name was David, and he was nothing like Marcus. Where Marcus had been flashy and charming, David was quiet and steady. Where Marcus had been concerned with appearances and status, David cared about substance and character. He was an engineer who designed sustainable energy systems, a man who spent his days trying to make the world better and his evenings cooking simple meals in his small apartment and reading books that made him think. We had met at a community event, one of the many gatherings that Gloria's Table sponsored in the Bronzeville neighborhood. He had complimented my mac and cheese, we had started talking, and 3 hours later we were still talking while the event wound down around us. He had asked for my number with a shyness that was endearing after Marcus's practiced smoothness, and I had given it to him with a flutter of hope that I thought I had forgotten how to feel. Our relationship had developed slowly, both of us cautious for different reasons. I was recovering from betrayal and learning to trust again. He had lost his wife to cancer 5 years earlier and was navigating his own journey through grief and renewal. We understood each other in ways that required no explanation, two people who had been broken and were slowly putting themselves back together. David had met my mother only through stories and photographs, but he seemed to know her anyway. He asked questions about her life, her cooking, her wisdom. He listened when I talked about missing her, and he never tried to fix my grief or rush me past it. On the anniversary of her death, he had accompanied me to the cemetery without being asked, standing beside me in supportive silence while I placed flowers on her grave and told her about everything that had happened in the year since I had last stood there with an empty finger and a broken heart. She would have liked you, I told him afterward, as we walked back to his car through the quiet cemetery paths. I hope so. He took my hand, careful and gentle. From everything you've told me, she was an incredible woman. I wish I could have known her. You do know her. I squeezed his fingers. Every time you eat at the restaurant, every time you taste something I've made with her recipes, every time you see me being strong because she taught me how to be, she's there. The ring caught the afternoon sunlight as we walked, the modest diamond sparkling with a warmth that seemed to come from within. David had noticed it early in our relationship, had asked about its significance, had listened with tears in his eyes as I told him the story of my father giving it to my mother on the day I was born. He understood why I never removed it, why it meant more to me than any larger or more expensive stone ever could. That ring is beautiful, he had said, not because of the diamond, but because of what it represents. 40 years of love passed down to someone who deserves it. His words had meant more to me than he could know. After Marcus, after Keisha, after all the ugliness that had surrounded my mother's legacy, David's simple recognition of the ring's true value was healing in a way I had not expected. Now, Standing in the kitchen of Gloria's table, I watched my team work with the precision and passion that made this restaurant special. These were people who cared about food, about community, about the mission my mother had inspired. They were not here for status or appearance. They were here because feeding people mattered, because creating spaces of welcome and warmth made a difference in a world that could be cold and unwelcoming. I stepped out of the kitchen and walked through the dining room, checking on guests and greeting regulars. The restaurant was full tonight, every table occupied, a waiting list for the next seating. We had come so far from the small storefront I had opened 5 years ago, and we still had so much further to go. New initiatives, new programs, new ways of serving the community that my mother had loved. As I circulated through the room, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The grief and the betrayal, the discovery and the investigation, the confrontation and the reclamation. Each step had been painful, but each step had also been necessary. I had learned things about myself that I might never have discovered if Marcus had been faithful, if my mother's ring had remained safely in my jewelry box, if my life had continued on its comfortable and unsuspecting path. I had learned that I was stronger than I knew, that I could face devastation and emerge not just intact, but transformed, that the legacy my mother had left me was not just a ring or a recipe collection, but a core of resilience that could withstand any storm. The last laugh I had come to understand was not about revenge or humiliation. It was not about watching Marcus struggle as a waiter or Keisha lose her followers. Those things were simply the natural consequences of their own choices, the inevitable result of building lives on foundations of deception and theft. The last laugh was this: standing in a restaurant that bore my mother's name, wearing the ring she had given me, surrounded by people I loved and work that mattered. The last laugh was thriving despite everything that had been done to me, building a future that honored my past, finding love again after learning to love myself first. I touched the ring one more time, feeling my mother's presence as surely as I had ever felt anything. She was with me. She would always be with me. And together, we would continue to create something beautiful. The dinner rush was beginning. I could hear the kitchen picking up tempo, the servers moving with purposeful energy, the beautiful chaos of a restaurant doing what it was meant to do. I smoothed my chef's coat, checked my reflection in a window to make sure I looked presentable, and headed back to the place where I belonged. David was meeting me after service. We had plans for a late dinner at a quiet wine bar, followed by a walk along the lakefront if the weather held. Simple pleasures, genuine connection, the kind of relationship my mother would have approved of and encouraged. As I pushed through the kitchen doors, ready to lead my team through another evening of feeding hungry people, I smiled. My mother used to say that living well was the best revenge. She was right, as she had been right about so many things. Marcus had tried to take everything from me. He had stolen my jewelry, my money, my trust. He had given my mother's ring to another woman and planned to claim half of my life's work. He had underestimated me in every possible way. And now he was serving tables at a mediocre restaurant while I built an empire in my mother's name. The last laugh was mine, and it tasted sweeter than anything I had ever cooked.